Everything you learned about history in school is incomplete. Archaeology has a way of shattering our most cherished stories with a single unearthed artifact, forcing experts to tear up the textbooks and start from scratch. By the end of this journey, you will see 25 discoveries that fundamentally rewrote the human story. We will explore a temple so ancient it predates civilization itself, and an advanced mechanical computer built over 2,000 years ago. How much of our past remains hidden just beneath our feet? History is a story we are still learning how to read. For generations, the only voices from the past were the ones that survived in ink and parchment, accounts written by the victors, the powerful, or the privileged. These written records, while invaluable, formed a narrow and often distorted window into what really happened. Then came archaeology, a science born from curiosity and a trowel. Beginning in the 18th and 19th centuries, this new discipline gave us a different kind of voice, one that spoke not from a page, but from the soil itself. It was a voice of physical proof, of broken pottery, of ancient foundations, and of long-lost artifacts. This evidence does not care for political bias or forgotten languages. It simply is. This scientific approach allowed researchers to finally test the grand narratives that had been accepted for centuries, and time and again, the ground provided a different story. Rewriting history, then, is not an admission that we were wrong. It is a celebration of getting closer to the truth. It is the triumph of evidence over tradition. Every discovery we are about to uncover is a testament to this ongoing process, a single piece of a puzzle that is far from complete. The oldest known temple in the world was not built by farmers, but by hunters. This simple fact, unearthed from a Turkish hillside in the 1990s, upended one of history's most fundamental stories. For decades, the accepted narrative was clear. First, humans discovered agriculture. Farming created surplus food, which allowed people to settle down in villages. Only then, with the stability and leisure that settlement provided, did they have the time and resources to develop complex religion, art, and monumental architecture. It was a logical, step-by-step progression. Then came Göbekli Tepe, this sprawling complex of stone circles and towering, T-shaped pillars dates to around 9,600 BC. That makes it older than the invention of writing, older than the wheel, and a staggering 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. The people who carved these multi-ton pillars and adorned them with exquisite reliefs of foxes, boars, and cranes were not settled farmers. They were nomadic hunter-gatherers. The scale of the work is breathtaking. Quarrying, moving, and erecting these stones would have required a massive, coordinated labor force, hundreds of people working together towards a common, non-utilitarian goal. This was not a village, it was a cathedral. Archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who led the excavations, proposed a radical idea. What if religion came first? What if the human impulse to gather for ritual, to create a sacred space, is what ultimately brought people together in large, organized groups? This gathering would have required a reliable food supply to feed all those workers, potentially spurring the early experiments with cultivating wild grains that would eventually lead to agriculture. Göbekli Tepe stands as a silent, stone rebuke to our old textbooks. It suggests that the genesis of civilization was not a simple economic calculation, but a spiritual one, born from a shared need to understand our place in the world. Göbekli Tepe revealed that civilization's first chapter was written not by farmers, but by hunters drawn together by a shared faith. But what about the voices of those first civilizations that did leave written records? For centuries, the story of ancient Egypt was told not by the Egyptians themselves, but by the Greeks and Romans who came after. The country's own history was sealed shut, its language a beautiful and baffling mystery. The walls of tombs and temples were covered in intricate hieroglyphs, a script so visually stunning yet completely unreadable to the modern world. These symbols were more than just art. They were a complete written language containing the laws, the poetry, and the daily lives of a people who had vanished into silence. Then, in 1799, a group of French soldiers in Napoleon's army made a routine demolition near the Egyptian town of Rashid, or Rosetta. They uncovered a dark granodiorite slab about the size of a large coffee table and covered in writing. This was the Rosetta Stone. Its power did not come from a single language but from three. The same decree from the time of King Ptolemy V was inscribed in three distinct scripts: Ancient Greek, which scholars could read, Demotic, the common script of everyday Egyptians, and the sacred, formal hieroglyphs. It was the ultimate translation key. For the first time, researchers had a parallel text, a linguistic bridge that could connect the known world to the unknown. The race was on to crack the code. The breakthrough came from a French scholar named Jean-François Champollion, a man so obsessed with ancient languages he reportedly claimed he could read Egyptian by the age of 16. He realized that the hieroglyphs were not just symbolic pictures, but a complex system that also included phonetic signs, much like letters in an alphabet. By meticulously comparing the Greek names of rulers like Ptolemy and Cleopatra with their carved hieroglyphic counterparts, he identified the sounds of specific symbols. It was a monumental intellectual achievement. The ancient script, silent for nearly 2,000 years, suddenly began to speak. The impact was immediate and profound. The Rosetta Stone did not just give us the ability to translate a single decree. It handed us the master key to Egypt's entire written legacy. We could now read first-hand accounts of Pharaoh's reigns, understand complex religious texts, and even decipher mundane business receipts and personal letters. Egyptology was transformed overnight from a field of speculation and wonder into a rigorous historical science. It proved that the greatest walls standing in history are not made of stone, but of language, and that sometimes the key to the entire past is nothing more and nothing less than a multilingual dictionary carved for eternity. But sometimes the key to the past is not a single stone, but a library of parchment hidden for millennia in the most barren of landscapes. In 1947, a young Bedouin shepherd tossed a rock into a cave opening near the Dead Sea, hoping to scare out a lost goat. The sound he heard was not of an animal, but of shattering pottery. Curiosity led him inside, where he found a collection of tall clay jars. Inside were not treasures of gold or jewels, but bundles of ancient leather and papyrus, dark with age. He had just stumbled upon the first of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This accidental find would soon erupt into one of the most monumental archaeological recoveries of the 20th century. Over the next decade, more caves in the cliffs of Qumran would yield over 900 manuscripts, a vast library preserved by the dry desert air. These were not just any old texts. They were ancient Jewish religious works, painstakingly copied by scribes between the 3rd century BCE and the 1st century CE. Among them were the oldest surviving copies of the Hebrew Bible, predating any other known version by more than 1,000 years. For scholars, this was like discovering the original master recordings of the most important book in the Western world. The scrolls allowed them to see, for the first time, what the biblical text said before centuries of copying and translation. The differences, while often small, were profound, confirming the incredible accuracy of the textual tradition, while also highlighting small but significant changes made over time. But the real revolution was not just in the biblical texts themselves. The majority of the scrolls were entirely new works, previously unknown to history. They contained psalms, commentaries, and detailed rules for a mysterious, ascetic community that many believe lived at Qumran. These texts revealed a Jewish world far more diverse and complex than anyone had imagined. It was not a monolithic faith waiting for a single Messiah, but a vibrant tapestry of competing beliefs with multiple sects, each with its own interpretation of Scripture and its own vision for the future. This radical religious diversity, preserved in clay jars, forced a complete reassessment of the soil from which both rabbinic Judaism and early Christianity grew. The scrolls showed that many ideas once thought unique to the early Christian movement were in fact circulating in Jewish circles a century earlier. The ground had shifted. Our received traditions, the clean narratives passed down through the centuries, were suddenly revealed to be the product of a long and contested history, where many voices argued and only a few were ultimately chosen to speak for the ages. The desert had given back the voices of the lost, while the Dead Sea Scrolls revealed a world of contested faith. A discovery on the other side of the world would unveil the absolute power of a single man. In the spring of 1974, a group of farmers digging a well in Shaanxi Province, China, struck not water but the clay head of a life-sized soldier. Their shovels had unearthed the silent vanguard of an eternal army, buried for over 2,000 years. This was the first glimpse of the Terracotta Army, a monumental project commissioned by China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. The sheer scale of the find was almost beyond comprehension. Excavations revealed not a few dozen statues, but thousands of life-sized soldiers, archers, and cavalrymen, each standing in military formation alongside hundreds of chariots and horses. They were built to guard the emperor in the afterlife, a clay manifestation of his imperial power that was meant to last for eternity. The organizational feat alone was staggering. Historians estimate it took 700,000 artisans and laborers nearly 4 decades to complete this subterranean city of soldiers. This was not the work of a minor or brutish state. It was the product of a highly centralized, technologically advanced, and immensely wealthy empire. Every single soldier is a masterpiece of individuality. From a distance, they appear as a uniform force, but up close, no two faces are alike. Each has distinct features, expressions, hairstyles, and armor, some standing with calm dignity, others with determined intensity. This was mass production on a scale the ancient world was not thought to have achieved, yet it was executed with an artist's eye for detail. The discovery completely rewrote the legacy of the Qin dynasty. Previously, historical records written by the scholars of the succeeding Han dynasty painted Qin Shi Huang as a cruel and paranoid tyrant, a man who burned books and buried scholars alive. And while his reign was certainly severe, the Terracotta Army presented undeniable proof of his other side. He was a visionary unifier who standardized writing, currency, and laws across China, and a ruler capable of marshalling the entire nation's resources for projects of breathtaking ambition. His brief dynasty was not merely a violent interlude. It was the very foundation of imperial China, a period of explosive innovation and artistic genius whose physical proof lay hidden, waiting for a farmer's shovel to bring it back into the light. Far above the clouds, a city of stone clings to the spine of a mountain. For centuries, the jungle grew over its terraces and temples, hiding it from the world below, its existence fading into little more than a whisper of local legend. That all changed in 1911, when a local guide led American explorer Hiram Bingham up a steep, vegetated slope to reveal one of the most stunning sights ever uncovered. This was Machu Picchu, the lost city of the Inca, a breathtaking citadel that had evaded the Spanish conquistadors completely. Because it was never found, and therefore never plundered or destroyed, it remained a perfectly preserved time capsule from the height of the Incan Empire. Walking through its precincts is like stepping into a world that simply paused. But what was this majestic place? Was it a royal retreat for a powerful emperor, a secluded country estate far from the capital, or was it a sacred sanctuary, a place of pilgrimage and celestial observation, hidden so close to the sun? The truth is likely a blend of both, a center of both power and profound spirituality. Its construction is a masterclass in engineering. The Incan stonemasons cut giant granite blocks so precisely that they fit together without any mortar at all. The joints between the stones are so tight, so impossibly exact, that you cannot even slide a knife blade between them. This technique, called ashlar masonry, allowed the structures to sway and settle during the region's frequent earthquakes without collapsing. But the genius goes deeper than just earthquake resistance. The entire city is a monument to astronomy. Windows and structures align perfectly with the solstice sun, and sacred stones are positioned to track celestial events. This was a society that did not just build on the land, but wove its architecture into the very fabric of the mountains and the sky. For the modern world, the discovery was a profound shock. The colonial narrative, written by the European conquerors, had long depicted the indigenous civilizations of the Americas as primitive. Machu Picchu shattered that myth with silent, undeniable eloquence. Here was a complex urban center with advanced water management, agricultural terraces that defied gravity, and a spiritual understanding of the cosmos, all achieved without the wheel, without iron tools, and without a written language as we know it. It was not a primitive outpost, it was a soaring achievement of human ingenuity, a civilization that mastered its environment in one of the most dramatic and beautiful settings on Earth. The silent, cloud-shrouded majesty of Machu Picchu revealed a civilization that mastered its world without a written record. But in the sun-scorched valleys of Egypt, another discovery would speak with a voice of pure, dazzling gold. For 3,000 years, the boy King Tutankhamun slept in a hidden tomb, his name nearly erased from history by his successors. He was a footnote, a minor pharaoh who ruled for only about 9 years. Then, on November 4, 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter's team found a single step cut into the rock. It was the top of a staircase leading down into the earth. After years of fruitless searching, this was the moment when Carter finally peered through a small hole into the antechamber. His financial backer, Lord Carnarvon, asked if he could see anything. Carter's now legendary reply was, "Yes, wonderful things." That was the understatement of the century. The tomb was not just a grave, it was a time capsule, sealed and miraculously untouched by the grave robbers who had plundered every other known royal burial site in the Valley of the Kings. The air was thick with the dust of millennia, and the glint of gold was everywhere. There were gilded chariots disassembled for their journey to the afterlife, elegant alabaster jars still holding sacred oils, and bizarre statues of gods and mythical beasts. But the true marvel lay in the burial chamber itself. Inside a series of nested golden shrines, like a set of intricate Russian dolls, was the stone sarcophagus. Within it lay the king's mummy, his head covered by the most iconic artifact of the ancient world, the solid gold death mask of Tutankhamun. The mask is more than a treasure. It is a portrait of serene, eternal youth, crafted with a perfection that is almost supernatural. The lapis lazuli and colored glass inlays create a lifelike gaze, a face of a young god king frozen in time. This was not just a piece of art, It was a magical object designed to protect the king's spirit and ensure his transformation into a divine being. The sheer volume of objects was overwhelming. Over 5,000 items were meticulously catalogued, from his royal thrones and children's clothing to board games and preserved food. This was not just a collection of royal riches. It was a complete kit for immortality, providing everything a pharaoh would need to rule in the next world just as he had in this one. The discovery ignited a global firestorm of Egyptomania. Suddenly, Art Deco designs featured lotus blossoms and scarab beetles. Fashion was dominated by Egyptian motifs. Tutankhamun became a household name, a symbol of mystery and unimaginable wealth. For historians, the impact was even more profound. If this was the burial of a minor, unimportant king, what unimaginable treasures must have filled the tombs of great pharaohs like Ramesses II? The craftsmanship on display forced a complete reassessment of Egyptian technology and artistry. This was not primitive work. It was the output of a sophisticated, unbelievably wealthy civilization operating at the peak of its power. The tomb of a forgotten boy king did more than just fill museum cases. It painted a richer, more complete, and infinitely more human picture of a world we thought we knew. The golden treasures of a pharaoh showed us the splendor of the elite, but it was a city of stone and ash that finally gave us the voices of ordinary people. In the year 79 CE, Mount Vesuvius erupted with a violence that defied description, burying the bustling Roman towns of Pompeii and Herculaneum under a deep, suffocating blanket of volcanic ash and superheated gas. It was a horrific, instantaneous end for thousands. Yet, that same catastrophe created one of history's most perfect time capsules. For nearly 17 centuries, these cities slept, perfectly preserved beneath the hardened pumice. When systematic excavation began in the 18th century, archaeologists were not just digging up ruins. They were opening a door into a single, ordinary day in the Roman world, a day that never ended. The level of detail is almost overwhelming. You can walk into a bakery and see the carbonized loaves of bread still sitting in the oven where the baker left them. You can stand in a dining room and admire vibrant frescoes of gods and goddesses, the paint as bright as the day it was applied. You can read political campaign slogans and crude jokes scratched onto the walls, the ancient equivalent of graffiti. This is not the history of great battles or imperial decrees. This is the story of daily life, frozen in a moment of profound tragedy. The most haunting discoveries are the voids in the ash. As the bodies of the victims decomposed, they left perfect hollows in the hardened volcanic material, their exact shapes preserved for centuries. Archaeologists realized they could pour plaster into these cavities, creating casts of the people themselves. The result is not a skeleton, but a ghostly three-dimensional snapshot of a person's final moments. We see a family huddled together, a man covering his face, a dog caught in a final, agonized twist. These are not anonymous artifacts, they are individuals, and their presence makes the distant past feel immediate and painfully real. This intimate view forced a complete shift in how we understand Rome. Before Pompeii and Herculaneum, Roman history was largely a chronicle of emperors, senators, and legions. These cities rewrote that narrative, revealing the complex social fabric of a thriving, multicultural port town. We learned about the bustling economy of shops and taverns, the varied diets rich with fish, fruit, and garum, that potent fermented fish sauce Romans loved. We saw the stark divide between the wealthy in their villas with intricate mosaic floors and the shopkeepers in their modest apartments above the store. History was no longer just about the people at the top, it was about everyone. The volcanic ash of Pompeii preserved the everyday world of Rome, but from the quiet depths of the sea came an object that defied every assumption about ancient knowledge. For nearly 2,000 years, it rested on the seabed near the Greek island of Antikythera, a corroded, calcified lump of bronze and wood hidden inside the wreck of a Roman cargo ship. When sponge divers recovered it in 1901, it was so encrusted and unassuming that it was initially set aside with other, more obviously valuable artifacts. It looked like a piece of junk. Decades would pass before anyone understood that this unremarkable lump was perhaps the most significant object ever pulled from the ancient world. It was the Antikythera Mechanism. X-ray and later advanced CT scanning technologies finally allowed researchers to see inside the corrosion. They revealed not a solid block, but the intricate remains of a complex clockwork device, a system of at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, precisely machined and mounted within a wooden case. Inscriptions covered its surfaces, a user manual etched in bronze. This was not a navigational tool or a simple timekeeper. It was a mechanical computer, an analog device of breathtaking sophistication built in the 2nd century BC. By turning a hand crank on the side, an operator could model the unpredictable motions of the heavens. The gears would whir into motion, driving dials and pointers that showed the positions of the sun, the moon, and the known planets against the backdrop of the Egyptian zodiac. It could predict lunar and solar eclipses and even track the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games. This was a portable cosmos, a simulation of the universe contained in a box. The mechanism's existence is a historical thunderclap. It proves that the ancient Greeks did not just theorize about the cosmos. They built machines to replicate its behavior. The level of mechanical engineering and astronomical understanding on display would not be seen again until the sophisticated clockwork of 14th century Europe. This single artifact shatters the linear narrative of technological progress, revealing a brilliant alternate path of innovation that was somehow lost. The knowledge required to create such a device, the understanding of gearing ratios and celestial mechanics, simply vanished from the historical record for over 1,000 years. We are left to wonder what other marvels were on that ill-fated ship, what other chapters of human genius sank to the ocean floor, leaving only this one cryptic and magnificent clue behind. The silent genius of the Antikythera Mechanism revealed a technological path lost to time, but on a remote island in the Pacific, a different kind of mystery stood in plain sight for centuries. The massive stone heads of Rapa Nui, known to the world as Easter Island, have long been icons of isolation and enigma. Towering over the landscape, their stern, elongated faces seemed to be all that remained of a vanished people. For generations, the story told about them was a grim ecological parable. A foolish society, it was said, chopped down all its trees to move these colossal statues, triggering a catastrophic environmental collapse that led to starvation, warfare, and cultural suicide. It was a neat and powerful cautionary tale, but archaeology has a way of complicating simple stories. Recent excavations did something astonishing. They started digging around the heads. And they kept digging. The truth emerged from the earth. These were not just heads. They were complete, full-body figures, many buried up to their shoulders in sediment that had accumulated over centuries. The Moai had torsos, carefully carved arms and hands resting on their stomachs, and intricate petroglyphs or symbolic carvings etched into their backs, designs that had been hidden from view for generations. Each statue was also part of a much larger complex. They stood atop massive, ceremonial platforms called ahu, which often served as tombs for the island's elite. These were not isolated monuments. They were the centerpieces of a sophisticated and deeply spiritual society. The evidence on the ground also shattered the popular myth of ecocide. Analysis of the tools used to carve and move the Moai, coupled with soil studies, paints a very different picture. The islanders were not naive destroyers of their own world. They were ingenious adapters. Pollen records show they managed the island's precious palm forests, likely using sustainable coppicing techniques to ensure a steady supply of wood. The idea that they blindly deforested themselves into oblivion does not hold up. So what really happened? The societal collapse was not a simple, self-inflicted punishment. It appears to have been a tragic confluence of events. After the statues were built, the society seems to have undergone a profound shift. The cult of the Moai faded, and a new, warrior-based culture emerged, symbolized by the Birdman ritual. This internal social upheaval, likely involving conflict between clans, made the society vulnerable. Then came the outside world. The arrival of European explorers in the 18th century was the true death knell. They brought with them diseases for which the islanders had no immunity, along with violence and the brutal practice of slave raiding. The population, which had once creatively managed its resources, was decimated by these external forces it could never have anticipated. The story of Rapa Nui is no longer a simplistic fable about chopping down trees. It is a far more human story of a resilient people who created one of the world's most unique cultures in utter isolation, who mastered their challenging environment for centuries, and whose ultimate downfall was not a failure of ecology, but a tragedy of history, a collision with a world they never knew existed. For centuries, the Trojan War lived only in the realm of epic poetry. The city of Troy, with its towering walls and heroic defenders, was considered a beautiful fiction, a story concocted by the poet Homer to explore themes of honor, love, and the whims of the gods. It was a foundational myth for ancient Greece, but for modern historians it was not history. Then came a man named Heinrich Schliemann, a wealthy German businessman with an obsession and a literal belief in Homer's words. In the 1870s, he began digging at a mound in Hisarlik in northwestern Turkey, convinced it was the site of the legendary city. His methods were, by today's standards, brutal. He used dynamite and massive trenches, carelessly slicing through centuries of occupation in his frantic search for the Homeric Troy he dreamed of finding. And then he found it. He uncovered evidence of a grand, ancient city, one that showed signs of being destroyed in a massive conflagration. He famously unearthed a glittering hoard of gold jewelry and artifacts, which he immediately declared to be the treasure of King Priam himself. While modern archaeology has shown that his treasure was from a much earlier layer than the time of the supposed war, and his destructive techniques erased as much history as they revealed, his central achievement was undeniable. He had proven that a powerful, fortified city did exist at the very crossroads of history and myth. Later, more meticulous excavations built upon Schliemann's chaotic start. They revealed that Hisarlik was not one city, but many, a tell composed of at least 9 different settlements built one on top of the other over thousands of years. One of these layers, known as Troy 7a, shows clear evidence of violent destruction by warfare around the traditional date of the Trojan War in the 12th century BC. There are collapsed walls, layers of ash, and a scatter of bronze arrowheads and sling stones, silent testimony to a desperate final siege. This was not proof of a 10-year war over Helen of Troy, but it was powerful evidence that the epic poems were not born from pure imagination. They were likely inspired by a real, catastrophic conflict that shattered a major Bronze Age trading power, a memory so profound it echoed for 500 years before Homer finally set it to verse. The discovery of Troy forced a fundamental shift in historical thinking. It proved that the line between legend and documented history is not a solid wall, but a shimmering, porous border. It suggested that the grand stories passed down through generations, the tales of great floods and lost cities and heroic journeys, might not be literal truth, but they could very well be the magnified, poetic echoes of real, earth-shattering events. If Troy was real, what other myths were waiting to be unearthed from the soil? Deep in the cool, dark earth of southern France, a secret gallery of masterpieces lay hidden for 17,000 years. Its discovery was pure chance. In 1940, a group of teenagers and their dog found an opening in the ground, a hidden shaft leading to a cavern they could never have imagined. When they slid down into the darkness with a makeshift lamp, the light flickered across the walls, and the stone itself seemed to come alive. A magnificent parade of ancient bison, horses, and stags burst into view, painted with an artistry so vibrant and full of life it felt as if the animals were breathing in the rock. This was the Lascaux cave. The paintings were not crude stick figures or simple outlines. These were sophisticated works of art. The artists used the natural contours and bulges of the cave walls to give their subjects a startling three-dimensional shape. A rounded rock became the powerful shoulder of a bull. A crevice suggested the deep space of a forest. They painted with a palette of red, yellow, and black minerals, creating a sense of perspective and movement that felt utterly modern. These were not the doodles of primitive beings. They were the creations of masters. The sheer existence of Lascaux shattered the popular image of the grunting, club-wielding caveman, a creature solely focused on survival. Here was undeniable proof that our Paleolithic ancestors possessed a rich inner world, a symbolic and spiritual life just as complex as their physical one. They were keen observers of the animal kingdom, capturing the tense muscle of a fleeing stag and the heavy power of an aurochs with a few swift, confident lines. This was not just decoration. It was a form of communication, a way of understanding their place in a world teeming with powerful beasts. The purpose of these caves remains one of history's great mysteries. Were they sacred spaces for ritual where shamans sought to connect with the spirit of the hunt? Were they an ancient school, a visual textbook where elders passed down knowledge of animal behavior and migration patterns to the next generation? Or were they something more profound, a fundamental human need to create, to leave a mark, to say, "We were here"? The art of Lascaux provides a direct, visceral connection to the minds of our ancient ancestors. It forces us to see them not as simple brutes, but as fully human people, capable of wonder, reverence, and breathtaking creativity. They looked at a blank stone wall and saw a canvas, transforming a dark, silent cave into a sanctuary of memory and meaning that would speak across hundreds of centuries. The ghost of a king lay hidden beneath a quiet English field for 13 centuries. In 1939, as the shadow of war fell across Europe, an archaeologist named Basil Brown began excavating a series of mysterious grassy mounds at a place called Sutton. What he found inside the largest mound was not a ship, but the perfect, sandy impression of one. The wood of the vessel had long since rotted away, but every plank, every rib, every iron rivet had left its perfect shape in the earth, a negative image of a 27-meter-long warship drawn in the soil. This ship had not sailed to sea. It had been hauled up from the river and buried as a royal coffin, a final resting place for a great Anglo-Saxon ruler, likely King Redwald of East Anglia. And within this ghost ship lay a king's ransom. The burial chamber amidships was a treasure chest of staggering artistry. There was a magnificent helmet of iron and bronze, its face a fierce mask with garnet inlaid eyebrows and a mustache that swept back to form the wings of a dragon. There were heavy gold belt buckles, intricate shoulder clasps woven with cloisonné patterns of gold and blood-red garnets, and a parade of silver bowls and spoons from the distant Byzantine Empire. This was not the hoard of a barbarian chieftain. It was the regalia of a sophisticated and powerful monarch. The world that Sutton who revealed was a direct challenge to the very term Dark Ages. This period, after the Roman legions left Britain in the 5th century, was long imagined as a time of cultural collapse, violence, and ignorance, a bleak void between the light of Rome and the later medieval period. The Sutton whose ship burial shattered that myth with golden clarity. Here was proof of a society with masterful craftsmanship, a people capable of creating metalwork of a complexity and beauty that rivals anything from the continent. The presence of Byzantine silver and Merovingian coins spoke of a kingdom deeply enmeshed in a vast international trade network, connected to the great centers of power and culture hundreds of miles away. This was not an isolated backwater. It was a vibrant, connected, and wealthy corner of 7th century Europe. The discovery forced a complete rewrite of England's early history. The Anglo-Saxons were no longer seen as primitive invaders who erased Roman civilization. They were complex people who built their own powerful kingdoms, developed their own stunning artistic traditions, and engaged with the wider world. The empty, dark age was suddenly filled with light, color, and the glint of gold, all rising from the imprint of a ship that carried a king into legend. Scattered across a high desert plateau in southern Peru, a gallery of giants sleeps. For nearly 2,000 years, a colossal monkey with a spiraling tail, a massive hummingbird, and a spider larger than a city block have been etched into the dry, stony earth. These are the Nazca lines, hundreds of immense geoglyphs so vast that their creators could never have seen their own work in its entirety. They were designed for a viewpoint far above the ground, a perspective no human could achieve. This simple, unnerving fact has fueled wild speculation for decades. Were they landing strips for ancient astronauts, as some claimed, or perhaps a complex astronomical calendar mapped out on an epic scale? The truth, uncovered through patient archaeology, is both more human and even more impressive. A determined German mathematician and archaeologist named Maria Reich dedicated her life to studying the lines. She proved that the Nazca people, who thrived from around 500 BC to 500 CE, created these wonders with astonishingly simple technology. Using wooden stakes and coiled ropes, they could plot out these massive shapes with geometric precision. Teams of workers would then carefully remove the dark, sun-baked surface stones to reveal the lighter, contrasting soil beneath, creating lines that have endured for millennia. This was not the work of aliens. It was a monumental, communal act of faith. The real mystery is not how they were made, but why. Why would a people expend such immense effort on art they could never properly see? The leading theory points to a deep, spiritual relationship with the arid landscape and the gods they believed controlled it. The animal figures likely held sacred significance. In a place where water was life itself, the hummingbird, a creature intimately connected to rain and fertility, may have been a powerful religious symbol. The lines themselves might have been ceremonial pathways, walked by priests during rituals to plead for water and a successful harvest, their giant forms serving as messages to deities in the sky. The Nazca lines force us to reconsider the very definition of practicality. To our modern eyes, a project that consumes vast resources for no visible, utilitarian payoff seems irrational. But for the Nazca, the payoff was cosmic. Their survival depended on the favor of the gods, and these lines were their most profound and enduring prayer. They demonstrate a society capable of extraordinary long-term planning and social organization, all directed toward a goal that was not material but spiritual. They challenge our modern assumption that what cannot be seen from the ground is without purpose, reminding us that the most powerful human motivations are often invisible. While the Nazca lines were a prayer etched into the desert floor, another civilization was building a library of clay. In the mid-19th century, archaeologists digging through the great mounds of Nineveh, in what is now Iraq, uncovered the personal library of a king. This was the library of Ashurbanipal, one of the last great rulers of the mighty Assyrian Empire. He was not just a conqueror, he was a passionate collector of knowledge. He sent scribes across his empire with a singular mission: to gather every important text they could find and bring them back to his capital. The result was a repository of over 30,000 clay tablets and fragments, each one carefully inscribed with the intricate wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform script. This was not a random assortment. It was a systematic collection of an entire civilization's memory, a vast intellectual vault buried for centuries. The library held everything from administrative records and legal codes to advanced scientific texts on medicine, astronomy, and mathematics. But its most stunning gift to the modern world was literature. Preserved in this dusty archive was the Epic of Gilgamesh, a sweeping poem that had been completely lost to history. When scholars finally translated it, they were astounded. Here was a story far older than the Iliad or the Bible, a tale of a legendary king's quest for immortality, complete with a great flood sent by angry gods. The parallels to later biblical stories were undeniable, proving that these foundational narratives had deep roots in a much older Mesopotamian world. The impact was revolutionary. Before this discovery, Mesopotamia was a vague land mentioned in the Bible, a shadowy region of obscure kings and fallen towers. The library of Ashurbanipal gave it a voice. These thousands of tablets provided the raw, primary source material that allowed historians to reconstruct the entire timeline of early human history in the region. We could now read the laws of Hammurabi in his own words, understand Babylonian star charts, and follow the rise and fall of empires like Sumer and Akkad from their own records. This library single-handedly moved Mesopotamia from the periphery of history to its very center, establishing it definitively as one of the true cradles of civilization. It proved that writing, law, and complex urban society were not born in Egypt or Greece, but here, in the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, centuries earlier than anyone had believed. A king's obsession with collecting knowledge had, quite accidentally, preserved the origin story of the Western world. A map can be a powerful argument, a single sheet of parchment that redraws the entire world. In 1965, one such document surfaced at Yale University, sending shockwaves through the historical community. It was called the Vinland map. Dated to the 15th century, it depicted the known world of Europe, Asia, and Africa with reasonable accuracy. But in the vast Western Ocean, it showed something that should not have been there, a long, ragged coastline labeled in Latin as Vinland. This was a bombshell. If genuine, the map was not just old, it was revolutionary. It proved that someone in Europe had cartographic knowledge of North America before Christopher Columbus ever set sail. It was the missing physical evidence for the Norse sagas, the epic poems that told of Leif Erikson establishing a settlement in a land he called Vinland around the year 1000. The map seemed to be the final, undeniable proof that the Vikings had reached the New World nearly 5 centuries before Columbus, but from the very beginning, something felt wrong. The parchment was genuine, but the ink became the center of a fierce scientific battle. Modern analysis revealed a devastating truth. The black ink contained a synthetic compound called anatase, a form of titanium dioxide that was not produced in a pure, synthetic form until the 1920s. The case seemed closed. The Vinland map was a brilliant, meticulous, and utterly convincing 20th century forgery, likely created to deceive collectors and historians. Yet, in a strange twist of fate, this fake document performed a priceless service for history. The intense controversy it generated forced academics to stop dismissing the Viking sagas as mere legend and to start looking for hard archaeological proof. The hunt was on. If the map was a lie, was the story it purported to tell a lie as well? This question led archaeologists to the very place the map depicted, the northernmost tip of Newfoundland in Canada. There, in 1960, just a few years before the map's appearance, a team led by Helge and Anne Stein Ingstad had already begun excavating a group of overgrown mounds at a place called El Ants Ox Meadows. They discovered the unmistakable remains of a Norse settlement, complete with the foundations of turf longhouses, a forge for smithing iron, and artifacts like a bronze cloak pin that were distinctly Viking in design. This was not a temporary camp. It was a base for exploration, exactly the kind of settlement described in the sagas. The discovery at El Ants Ox Meadows was the authentic proof the forged map could never be. It confirmed that Norse explorers did indeed cross the Atlantic and establish a foothold in North America around the year 1000. The map was a fraud, but the desperate search to debunk it ultimately validated the truth, permanently rewriting the timeline of European contact with the Americas. A clever lie, in the end, helped uncover a magnificent reality. A 3-foot-tall adult woman lay buried in a cave on the remote island of Flores. Her discovery in 2003 was so startling that researchers initially believed they had found the skeleton of a child. But the bones told a different story. This was a fully grown individual from an entirely new species of human, Homo floresiensis, quickly nicknamed the Hobbit for her small stature. And she was not ancient in a geological sense. Her species shared the planet with us, surviving on their island home until as recently as 50,000 years ago. This was a thunderclap in the world of human origins. For decades, the prevailing narrative was a straightforward march of progress. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, evolved in Africa and then spread across the globe, replacing all other, more primitive hominins like the Neanderthals. We were the sole survivors, the pinnacle of a linear evolutionary journey. The Hobbit shattered that simple story. Here was proof that another intelligent, tool-using human species had not only evolved in parallel isolation, but had endured long after we had become a global species. The implications were staggering. The journey out of Africa was not a single triumphant migration. It was a complex series of waves with different kinds of people moving, adapting, and evolving across the old world for millions of years. The Hobbit herself is a marvel of evolution. How did she become so small? The answer lies in the island itself. Flores was a world in miniature with its own unique fauna, including giant rats and dwarf elephants called stegodons. In a phenomenon known as insular dwarfism, large species trapped on islands with limited resources often evolve to become smaller over generations. The Hobbit's ancestors, likely a group of Homo erectus, arrived on Flores and over hundreds of thousands of years shrank to adapt to the island's limited food supply. They were not primitive throwbacks. They were sophisticated adapters, crafting stone tools to hunt the small elephants and likely using fire. Their discovery forces us to completely redraw the human family tree. It is not a neat ladder with us at the top. It is a tangled, bushy vine with countless branches sprouting, flourishing, and eventually withering away across the globe. The Hobbit is a powerful, poignant reminder that we were not alone for most of our history, and that the final chapters of that shared story are still being written in the soil of forgotten islands. 6,000 years ago, while the Great Pyramids were rising from the sands of Egypt, another monumental civilization was taking shape on the other side of the world. In the Supe Valley of Peru, the ancient city of Caral was being built, a sprawling metropolis of pyramids, sunken plazas, and residential quarters that stands as the oldest urban center in the Americas. Its discovery, fully recognized only in the 1990s, presented archaeologists with a profound puzzle. Here was a society of undeniable complexity, with massive public works that would have required a highly organized labor force, yet it seemed to lack two fundamental ingredients found in every other early civilization. There was no pottery, and there were no weapons, no fortifications, and no signs of warfare. Caral was a city of peace. This absence of conflict is utterly baffling to historians. The standard model for the rise of civilization almost always involves some form of coercion, competition, or warfare, forcing people to band together under a ruling class for protection or conquest. Yet Caral's architecture tells a different story. Its 6 large pyramidal structures and numerous smaller mounds were not defensive citadels. They were centers for ceremony and public gathering, arranged around large, open plazas. The society's energy was channeled not into making weapons, but into building monumental earth and rock structures, some reaching nearly 100 feet in height. How did they manage such a feat without the threat of force? The answer appears to lie in trade and a shared belief system. Caral was a major hub in a vast network that exchanged goods like dried fish from the coast, cotton from the valleys, and precious shells from the jungle. This economic interdependence, likely reinforced by a powerful and unifying religion, created a society bound together by mutual benefit and shared purpose, not fear. The lack of pottery is equally telling. While other ancient peoples were crafting intricate clay vessels, the citizens of Caral used gourds and woven baskets to hold their food and water. This suggests a society that found simple, effective solutions that worked for them, without feeling the need to adopt every technological innovation. Their sophistication was expressed in other ways, such as their advanced understanding of acoustics, with ceremonial trumpets made from animal bones, and their precise astronomical alignments, which integrated their architecture with the movements of the stars. Caral forces us to abandon a one-size-fits-all theory of history. It proves that civilization is not a single, predetermined path that all people must follow. A large, coordinated, and complex society could emerge through a different set of rules, powered not by the sword, but by the marketplace and the temple, a testament to the power of cooperation over conflict. Our own story of human origins suddenly became far more complex and far more crowded, while the Hobbit of Flores revealed a late surviving branch of our family tree. A discovery in the Caucasus Mountains was about to rewrite the very roots of that tree. In the ancient ruins of a medieval town called Dmanisi, beneath the stone foundations of a fortress, archaeologists unearthed something infinitely older. 5 skulls preserved with stunning clarity were buried in volcanic ash dating back 1.8 million years. They were not just old, they were a puzzle that threatened to tear down the entire classification system for early humans. Each skull was strikingly different from the next. One had a massive, robust jaw and a tiny brain case looking almost primitive. Another had a smaller face and a much larger brain. If these skulls had been found scattered across different sites in Africa, as they typically were, scientists would have confidently classified them into at least 3 or 4 different species. Names like Homo habilis, Homo rudolfensis, and Homo erectus would have been assigned, each representing a separate branch on our evolutionary tree. But here was the problem. These 5 individuals, with all their dramatic variation, were found together. They lived in the same place at the same time and died in the same geological layer. How could they be different species? The most logical and revolutionary conclusion was that they were not. The Demannacy hominins presented a radical new idea. Perhaps the early Homo family was not a sprawling bush of many distinct species, but a single, highly variable species, a population that had already begun its great journey out of Africa. This was Homo erectus, but a form more adaptable and adventurous than anyone had dreamed. The implications were staggering. It meant that the first exodus from Africa happened not with a fully modern brain or body, but much earlier, with a pioneering spirit that carried a diverse band of relatives across continents. The simple, linear march from primitive to advanced was an illusion. Our early ancestors were a tangled, varied bunch, and their journey into Eurasia was not a single event, but the opening chapter of a global saga. The 5 skulls from Demannacy did not just add a new name to the textbook. They forced scientists to erase whole sections of it and redraw the entire human family tree as a story not of separate lineages, but of one variable, wandering family. The wreckage lay at a depth of nearly 150 feet, a silent catastrophe preserved in the cold, dark waters of the Mediterranean. When sponge divers discovered it off the Turkish coast at Uluburun in 1982, they had no idea they were looking at the scattered inventory of an entire Bronze Age world. This was not just a ship, it was a floating warehouse, a time capsule from a globalized economy that thrived over 3,000 years ago. The vessel, dating to around 1300 BC, was carrying a king's ransom in raw materials and luxury goods. Its hull was packed with 10 tons of copper ingots, shaped like stretched ox hides from the mines of Cyprus. Beside them were a ton of precious tin, the other essential ingredient for making bronze, likely sourced from distant Central Asia. But the true story was in the diversity. Here was ebony wood from the heart of Africa, terebinth resin in Canaanite jars, magnificent cobalt blue glass ingots from Mesopotamia, and even amber beads that originated in the faraway Baltic region. This single cargo manifest connected at least 7 major cultures, from the Mycenaean Greeks to the Egyptians and the Canaanites. For decades, historians had pictured the Bronze Age as a time of isolated, inward-looking kingdoms, each ruling its own patch of land. The Uluburun shipwreck shattered that image with the sheer weight of its evidence. Here was undeniable physical proof of a complex and sophisticated international trade network, a system that moved essential raw materials and lavish finished goods across thousands of miles of sea. This was globalization in the 14th century BCE. The logistics were staggering, mining the copper, smelting the tin, and then coordinating their shipment on a vessel that would collect ivory, gold, and jars of olives along the way required a level of diplomacy, trust, and economic planning that rivals modern supply chains. This was not random piracy or simple coastal trade. It was a carefully orchestrated system that bound empires together in a web of mutual dependence. A kingdom in Anatolia needed Cypriot copper to arm its soldiers. An Egyptian pharaoh desired Baltic amber for his jewelry. This wreck proved they were getting it, and that the world was far more connected, far earlier than we ever dared to believe. The Silk Road would not emerge for another 1,000 years, but the sea lanes of the Bronze Age were already humming with commerce, carrying the very foundations of civilization from one distant shore to another. The idea of a brutish caveman grunting his way through a short and violent life is one of history's most enduring caricatures. This image of the Neanderthal was cemented in popular culture for over a century, a convenient foil to highlight our own supposed intellectual and moral superiority. But in the 1950s, deep within a cave in the mountains of Iraq, a discovery was made that would begin to dismantle this deeply ingrained prejudice. one fragile grain of pollen at a time. At Shanidar Cave, archaeologist Ralph Solke and his team unearthed the remains of several Neanderthals. One individual, an adult male now known as Shanidar IV, was found in a carefully dug pit. This was not just a body discarded after death. It was a burial, and the soil around him held a poignant secret. Analysis of the earth revealed dense clumps of pollen from several species of brightly colored medicinal flowers like yarrow and cornflower. These flowers had not blown in on the wind or been tracked in by animals. They were concentrated right around the body, as if someone had deliberately placed a bouquet upon the grave. Solke proposed a revolutionary idea, the flower burial. He envisioned a scene of quiet grief where fellow Neanderthals mourned their companion and laid him to rest with a thoughtful offering of blossoms. The implication was staggering. It suggested that Neanderthals were not simple brutes. They felt compassion. They understood the concept of an afterlife. They engaged in ritual, a behavior rooted in symbolic thought that was once considered the exclusive hallmark of modern humans. This single interpretation, though still debated by some scientists, ignited a firestorm of reassessment. If they buried their dead with flowers, what else were they capable of? The answer, we now know, is a great deal. Further evidence revealed they used complex tools, crafted adhesive from birch tar, and may have even created cave art. Most profoundly, genetic testing confirms that many people today carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA, proof that our ancestors did not just encounter them, they lived alongside them and they interbred with them. The lonely, brutish Neanderthal is a myth. They were a resilient, intelligent, and culturally sophisticated people, a branch of the human family tree that was not so much replaced as it was partially absorbed. The pollen in that Iraqi cave did more than just suggest a funeral rite. It forced us to expand our very definition of what it means to be human. A tranquil Swedish lake held a secret far darker than anyone could have fathomed. At a site in Motala, archaeologists excavating what they believed was a typical Mesolithic settlement uncovered something that chilled the summer air. At the bottom of a long-vanished lake, they found a collection of skulls around 8,000 years old. But these were not simple burials. Each skull had been deliberately mounted on a wooden stake, a gruesome display for the entire community to see. The victims were not from a single group but included men, women, and children. To add another layer of horror, some of the skulls contained fragments of other people's bones, carefully inserted inside the cranial cavity. This was not a random act of brutality. It was a calculated, ritualistic performance. For generations, the common image of early hunter-gatherers was one of relatively peaceful, egalitarian bands, living in harmony with nature and each other. The sunken skulls of Motala violently shatter that romantic illusion. Here was undeniable physical proof of complex and violent social dynamics at a time when society was supposedly simple. The careful preparation of the skulls, their public display, and the mixing of bones point to a culture with intricate beliefs about death, power, and identity. Were these the skulls of vanquished enemies, taken as trophies to demonstrate dominance and warn off rivals? Or were they the remains of revered ancestors, their skulls curated and displayed in a watery shrine to maintain a spiritual connection with the community? The evidence is stark enough to support either terrifying or reverent interpretation. This discovery forces a painful but necessary correction to the human story. It proves that the capacity for organized violence, for complex social stratification, and for ritual practices involving the dead did not begin with agriculture, property, or kings. These dark threads were woven into the fabric of human society from its very beginnings, a sobering reminder that our ancient past was every bit as complex and morally ambiguous as our present. A book filled with plants that have never grown on this earth circles the sky in unknown constellations. This is the Voynich manuscript, a codex that has defied every attempt to read it since its discovery in the early 20th century. Carbon dating confirms it was created in the early 15th century, a product of the European Renaissance, yet its contents remain as alien and inaccessible as if they had arrived from another world. The vellum pages are covered from edge to edge in a flowing, elegant, and completely unknown script. Not a single word has ever been matched to a known language. Alongside the text are breathtakingly strange illustrations. There are herbal diagrams of impossible flora, with leaves that twist into impossible spirals and roots that look like human organs. There are astrological charts showing unfamiliar stars arranged in nebulous patterns, and intricate drawings of tiny, naked women bathing in a system of green, interconnected tubes. For over a century, the world's top cryptographers have tried to break its code. Brilliant minds from both world wars, the very people who cracked military ciphers that saved thousands of lives, have turned their skills to this single book and failed. They have applied frequency analysis, linguistic models, and complex algorithms, yet the text yields no pattern, no syntax, no meaning. It is either the most complex cipher ever devised, a complete and meaningless hoax, or a glimpse into a system of knowledge that vanished without a trace. This is the manuscript's true power. It is not just a puzzle. It is a profound and humbling monument to the limits of our understanding. We are forced to accept that an entire intellectual tradition, a whole way of seeing the world, could simply disappear, leaving behind only this beautiful, frustrating, and silent artifact. The Voynich manuscript stands as a permanent challenge to our arrogance, a reminder that the past is not a puzzle we can simply solve, but a vast and dark ocean where islands of knowledge are separated by abysses of forgotten thought. Deep in the cold silence of a Siberian cave, a single fragment of a finger bone was all it took to introduce an entire ghost species into our family tree. The Denisova cave yielded this tiny piece, along with a massive molar tooth, too large to belong to any modern human or Neanderthal. For years, they sat as curiosities in a collection, their true significance locked away, waiting for a technology that did not yet exist. That key was 21st century genetic sequencing. When scientists finally extracted DNA from the bone, they expected to confirm it as Neanderthal. The results were something else entirely. The genetic code was distinct, different enough from both ours and the Neanderthals to represent a separate branch of humanity, a species now known as the Denisovans. They were not just a variation, they were a lost chapter. The real shock came when researchers began comparing this ancient Denisovan DNA to genetic databases of modern populations. The match was not in Europe or Africa. It was in the islands of Southeast Asia and the ancient lineages of Melanesia and Aboriginal Australia. People living today in these regions carry a significant percentage of Denisovan ancestry, up to 6% in some groups. This single genetic fact rewrote the map of prehistory. It proved that as our Homo sapiens ancestors migrated out of Africa and into Asia, they did not find an empty continent. They found a world populated by other kinds of people, and they interacted with them intimately. The story was no longer a simple replacement of Neanderthals in the West. A third player had been in the game all along, interbreeding with both Neanderthals and with us, leaving a permanent, living fingerprint in the genomes of people thousands of miles from that Siberian cave. Our own bodies are a living archive of these ancient encounters. Your immune system's ability to fight certain diseases, or how your body adapts to high altitude, might be a legacy gifted to you by a long-vanished cousin. We are not a pure species. We are a mosaic, a patchwork quilt stitched together from several different human lineages. The discovery of the Denisovans did more than just add a new name to the textbook. It forced us to accept that the human story is not a straight line, but a braided stream where many currents once flowed, and only one remains, carrying traces of all the others within it. A farmer's lost hammer led to a treasure that rewrote the final chapter of Roman Britain. In November 1992, Eric Laws was using his metal detector in a field in Hoxne, Suffolk, to search for that missing tool when the device screamed with a signal. Expecting to find the hammer, he dug down and instead struck a buried chest. Inside was not iron, but the brilliant, untarnished gleam of gold and silver. What he had found was the Hoxne hoard, the largest collection of late Roman gold and silver ever discovered in Britain. The sheer volume was staggering. The hoard contained over 15,000 gold and silver coins, all minted in the final decades of Roman rule. Alongside this fortune were personal items of breathtaking luxury, gold necklaces and bracelets set with precious stones, and an entire set of silver tableware, including intricately decorated spoons, pepper pots, and bowls. One silver tigress crafted to adorn a piece of furniture is a masterpiece of lifelike sculpture. This was not the scattered loot of a raid. It was a family's entire worldly wealth, carefully packed and hidden for safekeeping. The coins themselves tell a precise story. The latest ones were minted during the reign of Emperor Constantine III, around 407 CE. This date is the key. It was the very moment the Roman legions were officially withdrawn from Britain, leaving the island to defend itself. For centuries, historians pictured this event as a sudden, violent collapse, a dramatic fall into a dark age where civilization was extinguished by invading Saxon hordes. The Hoxne hoard paints a very different, more human picture. Whoever buried this treasure was not fleeing for their life in a panic. They were making a calculated decision. The chest was buried carefully and deep with the intention of recovery. The owner believed that the political chaos was temporary, that order would be restored, and that they would one day return to dig up their fortune and resume their life. This simple act of burial forces a profound shift in our understanding. The end of Roman Britain was not a single, catastrophic event that swept everyone away. For the wealthy elite, it was a period of uncertainty and managed risk. They were not necessarily overrun, but were proactively securing their assets, waiting for the storm to pass. This suggests a more gradual, protracted decline, a slow unraveling of Roman authority rather than a single, decisive blow. The Hoxne hoard is a time capsule from that precise moment of transition, a silent argument against a simple story of barbarian conquest, revealing instead the quiet, desperate hope of people trying to preserve their world against the creeping tide of history. A city without streets sounds like a contradiction, a place built against its own purpose. Yet at Çatalhöyük in Turkey, a sprawling Neolithic metropolis dating back to around 7,500 BC, this was the reality of daily life. Imagine a honeycomb of mud brick dwellings packed so tightly together that there were no paths or alleys at ground level. To visit a neighbor, you would climb a ladder to your roof, walk across the compacted earth, and then descend through another hole in the ceiling into their home. This was a society that literally lived on top of one another, a dense, interconnected hive of human activity that thrived for nearly 2,000 years. The architecture itself suggests a profound emphasis on community over privacy, a world turned inward. But the true mystery of Çatalhöyük is not just how people moved around, but how they governed themselves. In most early cities, archaeologists quickly find the clear fingerprints of power. They uncover a monumental palace looming over smaller homes, or a richly furnished royal tomb set apart from common burials. At Çatalhöyük, they found nothing of the sort. The houses are strikingly uniform in size and design. There are no grand public buildings, no evidence of a central storage for grain or wealth, and no burials that stand out as being markedly richer than others. The material wealth was spread evenly across the population. How could a settlement of thousands, one of the largest and most long-lived of its time, function without kings, without priests, without an obvious ruling class? This discovery strikes at the heart of a foundational assumption in history, the idea that urbanization and social inequality are two sides of the same coin, that you cannot have a complex society without someone ending up on top. Çatalhöyük presents a powerful counter-argument. It suggests that for a significant period, humans experimented with a different model, one based on communal cooperation and shared ritual. The evidence points to a society where status was not measured by material possessions, but perhaps by spiritual knowledge or artistic skill. The walls of the homes are covered in vibrant murals, plaster reliefs of leopards, and the skulls of wild bulls, suggesting a rich symbolic life that bound the community together. Could this have been the glue that held them in check? The city forces us to ask a difficult question. Is hierarchy an inevitable outcome of human nature, or is it merely one option among many that our ancestors explored? Çatalhöyük stands as a quiet, 9,000-year-old challenge, a testament to a road not taken, proving that the human story of living together is far more inventive and far more mysterious than we ever supposed. These 25 discoveries taken together reveal a deeper story about history itself. The first and most humbling lesson is the collapse of the simple story. We are taught to see the past as a neat timeline, a sequence of causes and effects leading predictably to our present. But the real past is a tangled web of coincidence, forgotten paths, and sudden changes. It was not farming that created religion, as Göbekli Tepe proved. The end of Roman Britain was not a single, violent invasion, but a slow fading captured in a buried treasure chest. Civilizations like Carol achieved staggering complexity without any signs of war or kings. The human family tree is not a straight line but a crowded bush, with branches like the Hobbit and the Denisovans surviving alongside us. Every time we think we have a rule for how societies work, the ground offers a brilliant and confounding exception. A second powerful theme is the tool that made these revelations possible, the quiet revolution of interdisciplinary science. It is no longer just the archaeologist with a trowel. It is the geneticist who can extract a family tree from a sliver of bone in a Siberian cave. It is the chemist who analyzes the ink on a forged map or the residue inside an ancient jar. It is the physicist who uses CT scans to see the intricate gears of a 2,000-year-old computer hidden inside a lump of corrosion. These discoveries were not made by any single field working alone. They required a chorus of different scientific voices, each one asking a new kind of question of the same silent evidence. The past did not give up its secrets easily. We had to invent new ways of listening, and what is it that these new methods are letting us hear? A constant, echoing refrain of human resilience and connection. From the Uluburan shipwreck, a single vessel carrying goods from 7 different cultures, to the vast trade networks hinted at by Sutton, whose Byzantine silver, we see that globalization is not a modern invention. Humans have always been deeply interconnected, relying on distant strangers for the copper for their tools, the amber for their jewels, and the ideas that shaped their world. We see ingenuity in the earthquake-proof masonry of Machu Picchu and the precise astronomy of the Nazca lines. We see resilience in the Neanderthal who buried their dead with flowers and the citizens of Pompeii who lived their vibrant lives in the shadow of a mountain. The ultimate lesson from all of this is a profound humility. Our current understanding of history is not the final word. It is merely the latest draft, a working theory that is perpetually subject to revision. The next farmer's plow, the next storm on a coast, the next advance in imaging technology could shatter another cornerstone of our collective story tomorrow. This is not a cause for despair, but for excitement. The past is not a closed book on a shelf. It is a living, breathing conversation across time, and every new discovery is a voice we have not heard before, asking us to reconsider who we are and how we came to be. From the silent temples of Göbekli Tepe to the enigmatic genome of the Denisovans, these 25 discoveries have proven that history is not a static record but a living, breathing entity. It is a story we are constantly unearthing and reinterpreting piece by fragmented piece. Each of these finds has forced us to abandon the comfortable, simple narratives we once held dear, and in their place we have had to embrace a past that is far more complex, far more fascinating, and ultimately far more human. They are a testament to the relentless curiosity that drives us to dig deeper, to question every assumption, and to listen intently to the whispers rising from the soil. This journey through our shared past reminds us that this is not the end of the story. The next great discovery, the one that will once again tear a page from our history books, is likely waiting just beneath the surface, a silent promise of new mysteries to solve. If this exploration has captivated you, consider subscribing for more deep dives into history's greatest enigmas, and share your thoughts on which discovery shocked you the most in the comments below.